You can find out more details on this story and many others on RT's website. Britain's new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has reaffirmed his support for Ukraine during a phone call with US President Joe Biden. The say the same thing to President Zelensky, but some are now criticising Sunak for following in the footsteps. So made her first international call in office to Ukraine. RT's Rachel Marston explains.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has just taken over the controls of the UK, and he says, "We will always stand with Ukraine." By standing with Ukraine, he means billions in UK taxpayer cash and weapons. Now, who's the we that voted for that? Certainly not the people of the UK. Sunak slips into the pilot's seat when the country is literally at the point of impact with a recession. And what's his symbolic first phone call? To Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, a call during which Sunak promised to, quote, stand in continued solidarity with Ukraine. Was there any indication that Sunak is laser-focused on Britain's massive economic problems? Well, he did have a phone call with U.S. President Joe Biden, who's been dragging his feet on that trade deal with Britain. But according to trade, it was largely about, quote, working together to support Ukraine and countering Russia and China. So, Washington's priorities. No mention of trade. Maybe Biden was confused about who he was talking to.
And whether it's the United Kingdom or just today, we've got news that Rishi Sunak is now the Prime Minister.
Well, anyway, whether he's talking to Rishi Sunak or Rishi Sunak, Biden knows that whoever it is won't object to Biden just rambling on about Ukraine. So before he was appointed Prime Minister, Sunak was pretty aloof about Ukraine, gave the impression that his focus, even with respect to Ukraine, was really all about doing what was best for the British economy.
They'll be there, and that there will have to be a deal with him. And if that's the case, is it really worth the pain to the economy?
Now it seems that voters are disappointed to learn what Sunak's real position is.
Right on tap, Rishi Sunak comes out and says, "We will always stand with Ukraine." So does that mean more of our money being sent off to Ukraine, whilst you have to make difficult decisions for the rest of us at home?
You could hear it in Truss's voice, and you can hear it in Sunak's. We won't let Putin win in Ukraine. It's as if they are using war to bolster their own image. Meanwhile, it's public service cuts for the rest of us.
Interestingly, Sunak gives a blank check to Ukraine whilst calling on Wales and Scotland to get in line.
Sunak didn't waste time calling Zelensky. He's already lining up the war in Ukraine to use as a convenient excuse for his punishing austerity cuts.
So after new Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni pledged her allegiance to Ukraine, it looks like the White House just almost copied and pasted virtually the same congratulatory and Ukraine-focused message for Sunak. Chatting up these vassal states seems kind of like chatting up conquests at the local bar. Biden uses the same pickup lines and probably won't even remember their names anymore.
A Romanian senator has slammed the country's president for supporting Ukraine, saying that the conflict in the neighbouring country is none of Bucharest's business.
We will not allow a single thing to aggravate this conflict, which is not between Russia and NATO, but between the Russian Federation and Ukraine over territories that belonged to Russia in the past, and it is its business what it does there. This is not Romania, NATO, or the EU's problem. Either you represent Romania and the Romanian people, or you resign.
This comes as Romania faces a political crisis from resigned over what he called differences with the country's president in relation to the Ukraine conflict. The ex-defense chief had previously stated that the only way to end the war is through negotiations with Russia. Well, as demonstrations take place in Bucharest against an increase in aid to Kiev and the transfer of French NATO troops to the country, along with plans to step up drills. The head of NATO's 2nd Brigade combat team has said that if a member of the alliance is attacked, Romania-based troops will enter Ukraine. But yesterday, the White House assured that no U.S. soldiers Well, Belgrade-based university professor Stephen Gajic says NATO clearly wants escalation and is seeking to use Romania as a platform for its troops.
I think that the Romanian defense minister is a true hero and a true patriot of his country. He knows what such a conflict would mean for Romania, and that is why he sacrificed with his career. Why on earth would Romanians, who are Orthodox Christians, the second largest Orthodox Christian nation, Russian Orthodox Church, be involved in a conflict with the Russians? I mean, that is against Romanians, the interests of Romanian people, but it falls into the plans for, I am afraid, a conventional, if not even, God forbid, nuclear war, World War III, and we are moving closer to such escalation. We should remember the statement that was said almost 20 years ago by George W. Bush when he called, I'm paraphrasing, that Romania is a spear of Washington or of America towards the east. So what he said in other words is that in the event of necessity, we expect Romanians to die for the of the U.S. Army in Romania on the borders with Ukraine is preparation for conventional war with Russia, against Russia.
Under pressure from anti-France demonstrations that erupted in Chad last week, the Paris-backed president has pointed the finger at outside interference, saying other countries are to blame for the violent protests.
These are not ordinary demonstrations that were brought under control, but a real, carefully orchestrated insurgency to create chaos in the country.
Well, the US has publicly backed the protests, saying it supports a government elected by the people of Chad. Demonstrators took to the streets after the president said he would stay in power for the next 2 years. We have the latest from a local reporter on the ground.
Here in Yemen, life has returned back to normal for the people of the city after last week's protest. There is still curfew in place. President Déby has announced that 7 days of mourning will be observed for the people who died in the protests last week, but he also said in his televised address that the protests are not normal. He warned of a real insurrection carefully planned to create chaos in the country. The president did not name any country, but he accused foreign powers of supporting an insurrection in Chad. Meanwhile, the man behind many protests against the current government, Success Masra of the Transformer Movement, said his conscience is clear and that his group will continue to advocate for change in Chad. But as people are trying to get back to their normal life, they do with knowledge that more protests are being planned, but they are hoping it will not escalate into other problems and religious.
France supports the regime in place in Chad, and that is the root of all the problems. Since we know France wants no change, all they want is their interests. They care about their population's well-being and
I think it's time to change things. Chad has many natural resources and it is very rich, but we face high rates of unemployment. For example, 2020, but I don't have any opportunities to get a job. It is very sad to live and see this in a country like Chad with all its resources. So we should change things now.
And tensions are also on the rise in Central Africa, where Kenyan troops are preparing